In this episode, I'm going to go over rear mounting my battery. Stay tuned. I decided that I'm going to put my battery right here, but there's this portion here that's still left over from the fuel fill area, and I need to notch this area out, and then I'll put in a piece of metal here to kind of support everything. Alright, so you can see that I've got everything kind of ground down, and I got my piece just kind of set in there. It's kind of friction fit in there right now. I'm going to go ahead and weld that in. Cut out some pieces of metal to fill in the gaps in the metalwork and add some structure to the battery tray area. Alright, so it's not perfect by a long shot, but that gives you a little look at kind of just sealing it off, which is all I really wanted to do with this, but clean it up and then we can move on to the next step. After I put in the patch panels, I welded in a piece of 1" by 1/8" flat bar, which is going to act as a mount for my battery hold down. I cut out a cardboard template to act as a guide for my hold down. When I was making a copy of my cardboard cutout in metal, there's one thin section in the middle that had to clear the covers for the battery, and I made sure to double that section up, so even though it was thinner one way, it was thicker the other way to compensate for strength. So this looks pretty good. I'm going to kind of mark this guy out where I want to drill my hole. Kind of round him off a bit. Take this guy out. Actually, it's kind of hitting the bottom here, so I'm just going to use a piece of flat bar to kind of mark where I need to curl this around. So use this piece as a guide for my curl around portion and drill this hole in reference to this tie down. Do that. Now that my hold down piece was made, I used a small section of flat bar with a hole drilled in it to make my main chassis ground. I put some tape on the threads to make sure no welding spatter would ruin the threads. Alright, so you can kind of see how everything's set up. Just put this battery in here for now. Oh yeah. Alright, so I realized I didn't have very good footage of basically this hold down right here and this hold down right here that hold the battery in place. So basically it's held down, you know, left to right, front to back, and also wanted to kind of show how this guy works a little bit. It's like a little hook shape. It just hooks on there, and then you can screw it down. And then the way that I welded down the chassis ground is we had that little flat piece of bar I drilled a hole into. I drilled a hole in the floor here that was big enough for that nut to go through, and then I just welded all the way around of it. It's kind of hard to see because there's primer on everything right now, but just wanted to give it a general layout. It goes right there. Rockin', dude. So I got these terminals that screw on here, so this will be my negative. And I gotta crimp these cable lugs because I got 0-1 gauge wire. And I'm gonna kind of loop this one around right here for our ground. That's why I put this guy right here. I do have to figure out how to crimp these guys though. I think I just stick the wire in there and I need to have something to hammer on it with the right shape. So I'm gonna figure out what that is right now and whip something up. Okay, so I have this 0 gauge wire here, and you can see I got this one end crimped. Feels like a pretty solid crimp. I don't have the proper tool. I'll show you how I did it. But for now, I'm just gonna mark where I want to cut it. Alright, so here's what I'm using. You can see I welded on, I have this weird thing that has a round part to hammer on. I use this kind of as a dolly type situation. But it's a half round that fits this shape pretty nicely. So I don't know if you could do it either way, probably. Since I'm going to be having this face up, I'm going to try it that way this time. Yeah, so if you're pretty careful, I don't think I cut any insulation. So I just set it there, and then just hammer it down. See, I'm pulling my weight on it, so I think it's pretty well in there. So, here's our ground wire. Connect them to our threaded ground connection right here. It's welded to the car. It's a unibody. Everything should be connected metal on metal in this guy. So I think that should work fine. Then I'm not going to screw it together. You can kind of see, I guess I can just for aesthetic reasons. That's how it will look. Alright, so the next thing on my list here is to mount the fuse. So when you run a battery to the back of your rig, you gotta have a fuse because you don't want to have a fire inside your cabin. So this is where I think I want to put it. This is my holder. This is a 200 amp fuse, which is what came with the wire. So I'm assuming I haven't done any math actually, which I probably should, but I don't think I'm gonna.
A circuit breaker is also a really good option because if something happens, you can just reset it. Whereas if this fails, you have to replace the fuse. For sheet metal screws like this, I usually use self-tappers, and then I come back with regular sheet metal screws.
Now I just have to, I got this negative disconnected because I don't want to accidentally cause some kind of an issue here, but I'm basically going to mount that guy like that. You can see I already got one end on here.
When I mocked up the cable path to the fuse, I noticed that it was a pretty tight kink, so I decided to move the fuse mount a little bit further so it would be a more gradual bend. This time I decided to get a rough placement for the fuse and crimp the cable ends before I screwed down the fuse, just so I didn't have any surprises when I hooked everything up. So I cut this length of cable. I used the hacksaw method rather than a safety razor, which worked out a lot better.
Get this guy on there. Yeah, so it wasn't a hugely aggressive move, just a little bit over. I think I'm pretty good with that. That should be a pretty good spot. So it's a really tidy, almost perfectly straight situation. It's not like a big S or anything like that, which I like a lot.
Next, I need to continue the positive wire forward to the main battery cutoff, which is right behind my e-brake.
Kind of envisioning where I'm gonna be. Make a line right there, and a line right there.
Before I connected up my cable, I zip tied a lot of my wires out of the way so I had a clear path to my disconnect. Using this main disconnect wasn't 100% necessary. It's just a cheap Harbor Freight unit that I printed an insulated box for, but it's just an added safety feature in case anything happens. I can shut power to everything. I decided to run the main hot wire from the main cutoff to the passenger side of the tunnel and up through that side of the firewall as well. It's important to make sure to heat shrink any exposed copper on this hot wire. Even though there's a main fuse in place, you really don't want to end up having to use that, so use all the protection you can with the hot wire. So now that we made it to the front of the car with our power wire, let's talk about this bulkhead connector, which its job is to pass the power wire through the firewall without arcing out on the body. I actually went through a few different designs on this, but this is the one I stuck with. So to start out, you need to make a hole. This is an ABS piece. It's actually two pieces. I have one piece invisible right here. You can kind of see there's a little bit translucency to that part I added there, but there's basically three pegs that kind of connect these two with a press fit. I added a little glue just for safety, but basically you need to make a hole that this can slide into, and then once you do that hole would be in your firewall, and then at that point you can use self tappers in these two holes, and basically this piece is fixed on one side. You also need to slide a 5/16 nut in this slot right here, which is a friction fit, and then you can go on to the other side, which in my case was the engine bay, and add this piece here. And the way you do that is there's 2 holes in this, which the you can see right there, the self-tappers, they fit into that area right there. So that locates it. And then obviously there's the nut on the back side. You can put your lugs here. And so at that point, once you get that screwed on, that bolt will be sticking out here. And you can add another nut on top of the first one to clamp down your other side. And then for safety, you can see these big slots that run down it. And this is a cover I printed that kind of slides into those grooves and covers your lugs. So that's pretty much the design. You can buy versions of these. I've never seen anything quite like this, but there are, there's other stuff available to use. I just wanted to use this as an interesting project, so that's what I'm using. But if you don't have a printer, just Google Bulkhead cable lug connector, and you'll find a bunch of different stuff you can use.
Alright, so there's a good look at the pass-through. Now I'm going to come in from the inside and do the sheet metal screws. So you'll see them poke out through there.
So this was actually a little bit different of an iteration of the bulkhead pass-through, but the same principle applies.
Alright, so it just worked out just like I wanted it to. The camera shut off, but you can see I got 2 screws poking out.
Given that the pass-through is right behind the air intake, it's super hard to get a good shot of this. So I just use my phone for a couple shots. Here you can see the alternator and starter wires coming into the engine bay. Here you can see it with the cover on. Here you can see what the inside looks like with a little teaser showing some future wiring. For the starter and alternator wires, I use the same method of crimping on the cable lugs as before, but this time I had to make a new U-shaped crimp jig because this time I was using a smaller 2-gauge wire that was actually recycled from the original wiring harness. The main starter lug can come directly from the positive battery terminal with only the main breaker in between the two. But for the alternator, it's preferable to use a 120 amp fuse or breaker because that's what the Altezza originally came with. I'm going to put this in line with the alternator. I 3D printed this little mount. I'm going to use a factory hole here. And I got a little peg here that I'm going to drill another hole to locate this whole thing. So when this thing is set up like this, we have continuity between the 2 sides of the breaker. It'll break if the breaker is overloaded past 120 amps. And you can see that there's no continuity between there. Normally I would have just screwed this right to the sheet metal, but in this case I just can't get a drill in there from the inside. So this is kind of an adapter I came up with to use a factory hole that was already in there, and just have to add that other hole which I can access from the wheel well. So I'm going to go drill that hole.
Alright, I think that's a pretty good place to end the episode. I'm working on the next one right now, which is all about the fuel system. So if you're into that, it's coming. More things are rolling on this project. I'm working on some of the finishing touches now, which is a lot of the fun stuff, so I'm really excited to drive this car. Stay tuned.